The next presenter is Jean-François Côté from the Canadian Wood Fibre Center. And Jean-François will present to us a project which is called the Improved Forest Inventory. Right. So I'll be quite brief because we heard in various projects, we heard about that. We saw the Canadian Forest Service. We saw even Natural Resources Canada. We saw the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre, but we don't know exactly what that beast is. We look like someone who was lurking behind a curtain like the Japanese movies with this. Is it a demon or will it be nice to see or attractive or not? We don't quite know. So I would like to cover the project currently ongoing in the Enhanced Forest Inventory at the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre and what it's all about and what our tentacular network, who we could join. Now, a bit of history about 13 billion after the Big Bang. 30 billion years after the Big Bang, there was the creation of the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre in 2007. It was formed by a very select group within the Canadian Forest Service, which itself is part of Natural Resources Canada. And if we want to make things complicated, the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre is a virtual centre. I'm at the lab in Quebec City, but I used to be in Newfoundland. And by the way, I could have been just about anywhere on the globe. It doesn't matter. We're a few researchers. We're now some 15 researchers across the country, but we are somewhat virtual. And we also are the government counterpart of FP Innovation. So all this put together means that's who we are. What happened in 2009, there was a workshop in Pointe-Claire in the suburb of Montreal. We were able to determine there were people from the industry, from academia who were invited. There was the first definition of our improved inventory enhanced inventory program. There were three issues: the semi-automated species classification, we heard about that, remote sensing approaches to do an area-based type of approach to inventory, and a single tree approach. And of course, we looked at technologies such as what was becoming more and more interesting is LiDAR and digital photography. From 2009 to 2011, there was work done in parallel with the Canadian Forest Service about the classification of the individual tree crowns. The software is called ITC. It was developed mostly by people in Western Canada with François Goujon and Don Lakey. And that ended, or it culminated in a package software called PCI, a PCI software package. There were good consequences to that, but the only problem is that it used optical imagery that was standard, so-called standard, so spectral information from remote sensor images. The problem with those images is that they often have to be corrected or normalized depending on the lighting conditions and the sensor configuration, image by image, but a series of images by series of images. So what happens operationally is that it becomes very complicated. So there is still a large part of research to be done in terms of species classification and also on individual tree crowns in great partnership with the UQAM and Benoît Saint-Onge, of course, and the AWARE project. In 2011, there was Murray. Murray spoke a lot about that. It was the project that took place in the Romeo Mallet and Hearst forests. That was the first operational testing or experimentation with the area-based approach with an airborne LiDAR. We saw the results. It was a pivotal study, a wall-to-wall study with using LiDAR or wall-to-wall. We saw really great interest for inventory. We saw that it was interesting for forest inventory, and that was our starting point. That was our spark plug at the Canadian Wood Fibres Centre. It made it possible for us to continue to position ourselves in terms of enhanced inventory. Since 2012, there's been a lot of research at the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre on the area-based approach. There was some research about the point density, what would be the adequate point density for our inventory. We also looked at statistical approaches to build models between the different point clouds, the cloud point cloud metrics and our inventory data. Are we going to use a parametric or a standard regression approach versus a KNN imputation approach, such as the random forest approach? We're approaching the random forest more and more. We're getting closer and closer to that, but that's out of practical experience mostly. There are approaches that were mentioned by Richard, things about the various attributes of wood fiber. We worked a lot on wood fiber attributes, and everything related to detection, sensing, validation, and estimation of the diameter of stems was also looked at. Then in 2013, there was the best practice guide for airborne LiDAR data acquisition. A lot of people were involved as authors, but a lot of people from Western Canada. FP Innovation was also involved. And I put the address here. You can download this in either French or English. We had more than 500 downloads just last year. Internally, it's just like the Adele video on YouTube in terms of success. It's like it's the bestseller for NRCan, or mostly, let's say, for the Canadian Forest Service at least. There was also decision support tools that were mentioned by Marie with the AFRID project, but the system was called AFRIDS with an S, so that something that happened also. This is ongoing research. It's not finished. We've heard a little bit about the use of photography. Digital photography, could it allow us to save costs for the remeasurement of inventories? We realized that with stereometry, we can generate a point cloud, which is very similar to LiDAR, similar density, and so on. So just to repeat a little bit, once we have a good DPM, an elevation mapping that is okay, we just add a canopy layer to be able to update our heights, volumes, and so on. So it's an alternative that seems promising, and it's less costly also for the current needs. Now, in my case, to come up with what I'm doing with my collaborators, with Richard, who is my main collaborator, we looked at terrestrial LiDAR, single tree approaches. We tried to get as much information about the structure of stands and individual trees, but really highly refined. We use 3D modeling, which I developed, and things like that, and we're now looking at the nodosity, the distribution of knots, the distribution of branches, their angles, also distribution of pits and foliar materials compared to the woody material in each tree, but also by plot. All this to try to develop tools to improve our basket of products. Instead of just measuring volume or quantity, we want to get to a closer level. What are the quality attributes of that resource? What can we extract? What would be best adapted for this product or for this plant? And can we optimize that resource, or can we get internal characteristics? The structure finally acts as a kind of a proxy to our relations between what we measure by remote sensing and what is internally. That is the structure that is used as a buffer to create a link between these two data sets. A lot of work has been done on that recently. We're not doing that without partners, of course. You see here that we have universities, provinces, FP Innovation, the forest industry, the private sector. I don't want to name any because I will probably forget some. Richard mentioned some collaborators for the AWARE project. There are many others also in the provinces, in universities, also universities outside Canada. There are participations from elsewhere, in my case from France, for the terrestrial LiDAR, but it doesn't stop there. There's really a lot of partnerships. The uptake or the spin-offs, I don't know, my translator could find a better word, but what's the general acceptance or uptake of that? With our history, there was a certain craze about that, and then it bore fruit. It gave results. There was LiDAR coverage. Those figures are not necessarily the total LiDAR coverage, but those were the coverages that were used by some research projects or by provinces individually. There was some coverage in the West, in BC, in Alberta, in Ontario and Quebec, and in the Maritimes. And we see that there's been roughly two analysis reports about economic analysis about the benefits. In Ontario, there was the celebrated figure of $1.6 per cubic meter of benefits if you use the enhanced LiDAR-based inventory. And in Quebec, we're roughly about $2.13 per cubic meter and 79 cents per hectare. Sorry, it's not by square kilometer, it's by hectare. So that bore fruit. That research gave some spin-offs. Our next focus for the next 2 to 5 years, we saw that we're getting very much involved in the AWARE project. Roughly, there was a lot of discussions with us to build the CRD program. Our basic objectives were really close to what NSERC wanted to do, and the CRD was based a little bit on our action plan about the enhanced inventory. So we have very close partnerships. Sometimes we are more in the shadows, sometimes we're more in front stage, but we're almost everywhere. Practically, we're part of the game at all levels. In particular, as Benoit will speak a little bit more about that after me, the semi-automated species classification using airborne LiDARs and digital photographs. We have an algorithm that is called SEGMA. Those are segmentation algorithms. This is ongoing work. It's key for the enhanced inventory, and we try to be involved in that too. We also trying to grow our inventory with the data on ecocide, or is it ecotone in French? I'm not sure. Predictions on ecological sites, looking at the mapping of wetlands, hydrologies, especially with the models like what Paul talked about with Paul Hart at the University of New Brunswick in Alberta. I think they're also using, the province of Alberta is currently using that type of model in their planning for forest operations. And finally, forecasting or prediction. We want to refine or enhance predictions with new technologies. We keep abreast of what's new. We try to keep pace with what's new. We're looking at the full wave form, the digitized full wave form. Beta, then the drones also, that's interesting. We're getting into multispectral or hyperspectral that opens more doors and different doors to not only detect species, but also to look at the health, the vigor of the vegetation and the stands. We, with the terrestrial LiDAR, with virtual plots, we tried to use the terrestrial LiDAR as a tool to create plots where we know everything, to be able to upscale that information with other remote sense data to have larger maps for on larger scales, while increasing the basket of products and using the same plots or reducing at least the number of measurements per plot. And we look also at wood quality. We looked at the fiber attributes. In terms of wood quality, we're starting to look at the visual aspect. The fact that we look at the knots and the branches, if we can link this in remote sensing, it means that we can attribute finer grades of quality when we want to go towards harvesting for sawmills in particular. We're following this quite closely. Politically now, just 1 minute, I'm not going to read to you the minister's statement, that's for sure, but roughly, what is the science framework at Natural Resources Canada since the last government with Justin? Well, we look a lot, we don't see the word forestry so much, strangely enough, but that is encompassed in other names such as climate change. There's clean energy and green energy also that's involved. There's all the what's under sustainability, environmental sustainability, also sector competitiveness, natural resource competitiveness, and of course public safety and security. We're much less into that, but we still hear about that, but it's not so important. And internally, I want to mention to you that raises a number of flags. That project raises a number of flags, and we got good feedback from the industry, from our partners, so that at a more political level, we always have a list of top commitments every year, every 18 months. And this time, the enhanced forest inventory and the word LiDAR was part of these within Natural Resource Canada and the Canadian Forest Service. For the next 18 months, we are really in a mode where resources will be allocated internally to give a big boost to that research program for enhanced inventory, to help our partners also explode into applied projects and develop very usable projects by forest users. That's it for my presentation.